Hey there, everyone. I am popping in today to talk about a few methods for creating spikes when you're about to mix or when you're wrapping up a production. There are many uses for spikes, like triggering gates, triggering sidechain processes in general, as well as triggering samples. And there are multiple ways of going about it. Um, I mean, you can go the MIDI route, you can go the audio tick route, or actually slicing the audio of your drums to just like the initial transient. And I'm going to cover a few ways of doing it today. It's going to be a bit more of a long video. um, yeah, I hope you enjoy and get some good info out of it. So yeah, let's just dive straight into it, and I'll just kind of explain as I go. So first, like here, I have a whole song. I'm gonna chop it up into just a small section of it, so it doesn't take forever, because it is a bit of a time-consuming process to get all these done properly. But essentially, as a bottom line, the main objective is for you to have a very short burst of sound for each shell on your drums, uh, that you can then use, for all these triggering purposes. Let's put it this way. So let's break it down. We'll go from the easiest version of how you can create the spikes to a straightforward but still just audio related, and then we'll go into the how to extract the MIDI, or at least how I like to extract the MIDI and make sure everything works out in a mixed context. So yeah, so here I'll just play through. I mean, this is unmixed, but it's just some rough drums. Cool. So we have kick, snare, and two toms, and we basically want to create spikes out of these. The first and easiest way, which actually would be applicable on this scenario, because these drums are actually programmed, even though there's some bleed in them. So the transients are very, very clear, and the noise floor is quite low. So you could get away with just going straight into technique number one, which is using trigger 2 to actually slice up the audio into your spikes. Sometimes you can't really do that because you have a lot of bleed between one mic and the other, depending on the quality of the recording. It's a bit of a nightmare to do that with trigger 2, because you have to keep clip gaining sections of the audio, so it doesn't quite work. But or I mean, it works, but it's not as straightforward. So in this first, let's say, easy scenario, what you want to do is you would choose, and I guess this first step goes for every scenario really, but you're going to select uh, the the track that has the best transient response. In other words, the mic that's closest to each kit. So like kick in is going to be the clearest transient, or at least the first transient that happens between kick in and kick out. And then like snare top generally is what you would use. And for toms, it's just the toms. If you have top and bottom toms, you would go with the top toms. And you would go ahead and just duplicate those tracks. In my case here, I have a few, like in my template, I already have some tracks laid out for this. So I'm just gonna engage that, but it's the same idea, right? You would be grabbing the tracks that you want to use and duplicating them. I'm just gonna drop these in where they need to go. can see there's some bleed in those tracks, which is basically what we were trying to get rid of. And on our first example, we would engage trigger, so we would put an instance of trigger on every track. And here there are two ways you can go about it. You can use an audio tick, or you can use the audio itself, which is the more phase accurate, especially if you were gonna do if you're gonna be triggering samples off of this audio specifically. That's probably the best way to go about it. But when I say a tick, this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So something that's like a very sharp transient that's super short, and you would place that on every hit, right? So in this case, super easy. You just go and set your detail. You know, make sure it grabs every like it grabs every hit. So you just kind of quickly go one by one and set your threshold so it's picking up all of the hits. You would do the same here on the snare. I think this one, there's just a snare roll that you have to accommodate for. Let's bring it up, down. Let's see. Yeah, it's picking up all of the hits. Let's check the toms. And then on the other one, let's bring that down a little bit. It seems like all of them are pretty straightforward. And again, like in this scenario, it's as easy as that. You have clean signals. You're just going to be getting a blip for each thing, and then I would go in and actually commit. Boom. Then we have a set of spikes here. For every hit of the drum, you have, you know, your blip. Cool. The second option here, still sticking with this first method of using trigger 2, is to actually do basically the same thing, except you're not placing a sample on top of it. You just go with your mix knob here on the output of the plugin. You just roll that all the way to 0. Let me isolate one of the tracks so you can hear what that sounds like, and then just turn on the gate, go the fastest attack, no hold, and something around like 20 to 40 milliseconds is where I kind of park this generally. So what's happening here, it's getting the original sound and actually just chopping it up, right? With the snare, let's do the same thing. Let's stick with 20 milliseconds for this example. Sometimes it's good to go a little bit over the 20 milliseconds, like maybe 40, especially if you're going to be triggering samples off of these. It sometimes helps to have a little bit extra sound coming through for phase accuracy. Boom, boom. But now that we have set everything to turn on the so again, pretty straightforward. It's going to be following the same detail levels that we have there. So if we commit these guys, let's actually just do nothing. If we commit these guys, you'll see that it's basically, a representation of a shorter version of those hits. So kick, snare, and you can make it even shorter or a bit longer depending on the scenario. Again, with this, we had a pretty clean sound from the beginning, so it just does a really good job. And this is a real time saver. If you can do it this way, it's really easy. Now we get into a bit of the the harder versions of this. Well, not harder, just more, work intensive. I'll just make that inactive, but actually, before making it inactive, let's just quickly take a listen. Let's mute these guys. Right, so it's just a shortened version of the same thing. And here, just an added bonus, I guess, that's interesting to keep in mind. With this technique, you're able to, within reason, to stick with the original velocity. So if you're triggering off of trigger 2, for instance, it will pick up those levels. And if you have like TCIs that have round robins and different velocity layers, this is good for that because it will stick to the dynamics that you had originally. On this first instance here, I had the samples set in a way that there's no velocity. So like all of them are exactly the same, and this is really good for sidechaining. Like if you're sidechaining your bass from the kick signal, you would, in this scenario, use the kick sidechain track here, and you have no variation in level, so every hit is exactly the same. It goes for gates as well, so you can set your gate at a certain level, and you don't have to worry about a harder hit will open the gate for longer or shorter or not open it, because it's always the same thing. In this scenario here, because we're just using the gate function, it's not going to do any sort of normalization. So you're kind of stuck with the original velocities, which again is good if you're triggering samples. So maybe you do both. You print it, or you print the sample and use that for sidechaining, and then you do the shortened version of the audio for triggering samples. Cool. Moving on to the next option, which is basically the same thing we just did except manually. So on this scenario, you don't use trigger 2, you're gonna actually slice the audio on every transient. But you're still, like, the objective being you want a shorter version of the original audio, right? Now on Pro Tools, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, still a little bit time intensive if you're doing a whole song. Here it's going to be super quick because we're doing just a short section. But we are going to open up Beat Detective. We can just set it to whatever's the highest, so it picks up everything. For kicks, high emphasis tends to be the best. Capture, analyze, and then just go through. And this is where it might help. Let's see, sometimes it won't get like certain notes, and you have to go in and do those manually after. But also, if you have something that has a lot of bleed, you want to make sure that you're only getting the right transients at this stage, right? So you just kind of quickly go through all the transient markers. Like here, there's a mistrigger there, right? So you get rid of those. And in this case, I'm pretty sure it's not going to let me put in a marker there. Yeah, so you just separate and then come back. And actually, I've been finding that you don't really need a pad on this, because I'm not going to be putting like a fade in on this guy. So yeah, you just hit separate and then go into the hits that are missing, and then you can do those after the fact. You want to make sure that you're right on the actual transient, so you can see that it's right there. Separate, cool. Now all the hits are done on this. You can just delete the first one that doesn't have anything. And you could do each one individually. In this case, just to save a little bit of time, I'm gonna go and do all of them at once. Well, kick and snare. So it's basically the same process for snare. But snare low emphasis is a little bit better. Analyze, cool. And then you just, make sure you grab all the hits on the snare. Let's see. Make sure we're ignoring all of the bleed information. So we have a couple flams here. Those I would flag individually. So I tend to just go in and put a quick marker on flams so I can take care of them. But it looks like it's picking up everything else. Sweet. We hit separate. And in this scenario, we could go ahead and do the toms the same way, but toms, we tend to have like a lot of bleed signal on tom mics, so it's kind of annoying to do it with Beat Detective because it's going to be picking up all of those transients most of the time. So I found the amount of time it takes to set up the Beat Detective properly on tom tracks, it's just easier to go and do every tom hit manually. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to take a look at these. So with flams, it's a bit of a tricky situation. It depends on how quick they are, because generally what we're trying to do here is we're going to make all of these hits become 20 to 40 milliseconds. So if they're super quick and like 20 milliseconds isn't enough to cover the whole thing, we'll just treat it as one hit. But if you have enough space, and we can find that out going here and then turning this to time, and then just like highlighting, so we can see that the transient is somewhere around there. So this is roughly, this would be 20 milliseconds. So it's not quite enough. So we're basically going to treat these as if it was one hit. We're just going to make them a little bit longer. And we'll probably stick with 40 milliseconds in this case. So it's a bit of a case-by-case scenario. And we're going to leave the markers there so we know to come back and check it. You can close Beat Detective. We're going to go on to this. Well, actually, we're going to select all of these tracks. We're going to put a fade, a safety fade in all of them. And let's actually make that 40 milliseconds, because that's the size that we want each hit to be. We're going to go ahead and press OK. Okay, we go back to, let's make it 20 again. There we go. It was probably, some of these hits were too short, probably these ones, to be able to, you know, fit a 20 millisecond fade in, or 40 milliseconds. So we go back to the 20 and it's fine. That's just so we don't make the clips go to zero when we're shortening them. Cool. Once we have our safety fade ins, you can see all of them popping up there, right? We're going to go on to here, this hand thing. We're going to right click it and go into object. Object. And then we're going to select these. We're going to set our nudge value to minutes and seconds, and we're going to go very like high, like the highest 1 second. And we go command, I guess in Windows it would be control, and then minus on the numpad, and that's going to shorten it by the nudge value. Then we go down, let's go to 500, bring it down, 100, down, 10. All all the way up to the point where, you know, they don't go any further because they're pretty much hitting, you know, our safety fade in. Cool, we double check. And we can see which ones are the hits that are super quick. I mean, we have the flams here to pay attention to later on. But considering how big the gaps are, we could probably dial back. So we go back to 10 milliseconds, and then we do the opposite. So Command plus, that's going to increase each, like the edge of the clip by 10 milliseconds. Let's go around there, right? So this is 20 milliseconds, that's 40. I think 40 is enough, we can leave it there. And for the flams, 40 is actually covering both, but we're gonna select just those two. And let's go a little bit further. So just 2 more clicks there. So those are 60, everything else is 40. Now we go back to the normal tool, select everything, we delete all the fades, and then we put a different kind of fade, which is going to be like no fade in, just a 15 millisecond fade out. We could actually do 20 on this. And there we go, we have our short bursts here. Let's take a listen. So similar, you know, the same idea, similar concept here. Yeah, for some reason this one got picked up a bit weird. Let me make sure it's there. You always have to kind of, you know, pay attention. It's good if you're, yeah, see, some fast hits, sometimes you kind of miss the mark. So it's good to double check them as you go. This one also seems to be, yeah, should be right there. Let's check. Yeah, we have both hits. Cool. Right, there we go. This is, you know, the spikes for kick and snare. For toms, as I was saying, it's a little bit quicker to just go straight in and do them individually. These are actually not supposed to be part of the section, so I'm going to ignore them. It's just these guys. And to do them individually, what we want to do is we want to have this set to minutes and seconds, and it's a series of hotkeys. So basically, we tap the transient, make sure it's actually on the transient where it needs to be, and we're going to press on the none pad. We're going to press, I think it's forwards slash, this guy, 3 times, and you can see up here it's going to be moving some things. 2, 3, and then we're going to go right arrow, 1, 2, so it goes onto the time domain there, and then we set our 20 milliseconds there. Press enter. That's going to highlight 20 milliseconds from that transient. You then press B, and we're going to set this back to 15. Boom, and we have our 20 millisecond hit there. If we want to do 40, let's just revert back. If we want to do 40, it's same thing. Instead of typing up 20, we'll do 40 there. So again, we make sure that this is on the transient. Boom, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 40, enter, and then B and F. And then we can just delete whatever came up before that, right? So when you're doing a whole song, you just go through that process for every hit. Make sure you're on the transient. 2, 3, 1, 2, boom. Oh, not. put 80, 85. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 40, enter BF. Let's see, is that on the transient? It's almost 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 40, boom. Ah, there. They're almost, like, they're close, but just missing. I did 85 again. Just for reference, the 85 is because if you have this set to bars, 85, like 0.85 is basically roughly 40 milliseconds. So yeah, just as an example, if you have this set like this, 2, 3, 1, 2, 85, then it, you know, basically 40 milliseconds. Then you do the other one, and then you can, you know, delete whatever's not being used. Let's check this. Right there. 40 milliseconds, done. Next one. 3. Boom. And that is donezo. Those are our tom hits. And in the end, the result should be pretty much sound-wise the same as the last batch of fades that we did, because, you know, it is supposed to be pretty much the same sort of, you know, audio. You know, like, if we go like that. It's basically the same thing. So one step up that you can do here, so like you could, once this is done, what I would do is just basically highlight it, like maybe put it on a separate playlist, consolidate, and there they are. The other thing that you can do if you want to do the thing where you don't have any velocities, because you don't want to trigger stuff from this, you just want to use it as a sidechain. While you're on this format, you can just go ahead and select all of these clips at once. Go to Audio Suite, normalize. Here you want to make sure you have it set to clip by clip and create individual files, but then you just plot, let's say -5, and then render, and it's going to normalize all of those hits to the specific value. And then you can, you know, do that, and it would technically put all of them to the same peak value. So that is creating spikes from the audio itself. Now the last iteration of all of this, which is the one that I like to use when I'm producing and mixing, that's the way I prefer to go, is to actually create MIDI notes for each individual hit, and use those MIDI notes to trigger samples from something like Superior Drummer or Addictive Drums or GDD, GGD libraries, because then you have full, you know, customizability for velocities and so on. And then you can always, you know, create the ticks from the MIDI as well. So that's also pretty useful. I hit everything here. So yeah, let's just go back to this. And actually, let's go back to having, delete these guys actually. So last example here, which is, I don't know if it's the most time consuming one. This one where you create the spikes individually, especially the tom part, is a little time consuming if you're doing a whole song. But the MIDI one is probably the most time consuming because it requires the most amount of attention to detail, because you do need those MIDI notes to be sample accurate as much as possible. So you basically have to listen through the whole song a few times, and yeah, you'll see there's a bit of a process to it. But essentially, still using trigger 2 on this scenario, so I just copied over the audio again, so it's, you know, starting from scratch. On this scenario, what we have, let me just shorten this because I don't necessarily want to do these 2 hits. What we want to do is, you can do this with trigger 2 or MassiDRT as well. They have a like MIDI capture function, right? So the first step is to, you know, set up trigger as if you were going to use it to trigger stuff. So trying to get as many hits as possible with the minimum amount of miss triggers. Sometimes you do get like a miss trigger here and there, and then you have to accommodate for that. But basically, I know the way it's set up, it's going to pick up everything, but you would just go in and set it the way you would for triggering, and you let it run from start to finish, so it captures the whole you know, bit of the song that you're doing. Cool. The next step on this is you want to put those MIDI files somewhere. I already have some MIDI tracks set up here. So basically you just need to create some MIDI tracks that you're gonna put those files onto. And also, this is something you can set up ahead of time if you already know what notes you need. So like, let's say your kick is always a C1. You can go on to your settings on trigger 2 and set the MIDI out to be whatever note you want, essentially. So I already have done that. Like, I have my own MIDI map for drums, so that whenever I'm using these 2 libraries that are the ones that I use 99% of the time, they're being triggered by the same MIDI map, right? Like a custom map. That way I can program into one track and it's gonna, you know, work regardless of what library I'm using. But yeah, you just go onto settings. In my case, kick is always C1, snare is always D1, and so on. So I already have those set up. So it means they're gonna output the right notes already, and I don't have to go in and put them in place. So yeah, it goes from to the beginning of the song always. So yeah, you basically just go drag onto the MIDI track. And ideally, this process is going to capture all of the hits. It is very common that it will miss a few or capture a few, you know, miss triggers from the bleed. So you definitely have to go in and check for those. That's the first step. And then the second step is making sure that everything is in the right position. So I just like to consolidate it so Git grabs the name. At this point, we don't really need these tracks anymore. I always just make them inactive and just bring them up here for a visual cue, because we're basically going to turn these here on Pro Tools. You can actually have the notes right there and mess with them from here. We don't need to open up the MIDI editor. and then yeah, just make them super small so it's like pretty easy to handle. And then I just like to drag these right up top, just so as a visual cue. So it's like right next to it. And then basically you just go through quickly, and this is where I said it's kind of time consuming. You just go through and make sure that every hit is captured. And it looks like it's doing a good job so far. Let's see. We already know that there are a couple flams that we want to pay attention to. Yeah, see, it's missing the flams, both of them. So you basically just go in and tap those in. So C to copy. We go right on the transient for that. This is also a weird transient, right? Because it's supposed to be going down first. So I would assume it's supposed to be here. So we just paste it right there. And you can always move that later as well. This one I'm going to put right here. And with Pro Tools, this is a cool thing as well. Like if you go, when you have a MIDI note selected, you just go left and right arrow. It will jump from note to note, sort of like tap to transient. And then you go like P to go up to the top track, and then the two dots to go, down tracks as you would. And sometimes that makes it quicker if you want to just kind of, if you have like this already copied and you just kind of like, oh, that note is missing, you just go up, tap to transient where it needs to go, and then boom, and then paste. So all the notes are here. That's cool. The next step is to make sure they're aligned, right? And this is a bit of a tricky one, because depending on the amount of bleed you have, the transient itself can be a little bit blurry, but essentially you want to be within 1 to 2 samples of the actual transient. So let's say the transient is the initial part of the transient is right there. You need to change your nudge to 1 sample at a time, and then you're going to use these guys here to move the note around. Oops. And yeah, you're just going to go and be like, okay, this is right where the sample needs to be, right in the beginning. This one is a little bit off. That's right there. And yeah, you just basically go as close to that as possible. I noticed that like if you're here or there, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. But these ones that are kind of far, they might sound a little off. Sometimes you have to zoom out a little bit to understand what the fuck is going on. Okay, so that's really off. Boom. And sometimes it happens that it's like, and that's why I said like at this point it doesn't really matter. You're between like 1 sample, so it doesn't matter if you put it there or there. It's gonna work. This one, there's a little bit of this weird thing. I would say the transient is probably right there. Same with that guy. Same with that guy. And you just go through the whole song and every, shell, and place it where it needs to go. This is a good time if you're doing this. It's a really good time to listen to a podcast because it's not something you have to listen to, at least not at this stage. And here it's actually a little bit tricky. I would actually try and listen to this before moving on to make sure that I'm picking the right transient on this, because on this scenario it's a bit weird. Like it could be there and this could just be some weird bleed, but it could also be a weird, you know, shape, and that's exactly where you want to be, like at that, you know, front end, which means all of these notes would be wrong and you would have to do the job again. So like if you have an instrument already set up, you can load some return tracks just to make sure you don't have to redo. That can be helpful. I probably already have some levels up on this. Let's see. Yeah. So we should be able to hear, yeah, there's a kick hit right there. So we can listen to the kick soloed. Yeah, that sounds okay compared to okay, so we have just checking phase, and then we want to compare that. I think the other one sounded a little bit better. And you can always go back, like once you're done with the process, you can always like listen through the whole song, and if one note is kind of standing out a bit weird, you can always go back and move it. Okay, so let's go back to where we stopped, which is there. Here. Yeah. The initial hits were kind of shitty, but now I guess I probably fixed those ones. Clearly right there. By the way, this is, I mean, something kind of a fun fact. This is also, if you're like into metal and metal production, you probably heard of Jens Bogren. And you know, I've been doing the MIDI thing for a while, and I went to a workshop with him at MetalCon this year, and he's also using MIDI, so to me that was all the information I needed. So now we're doing snare. Yeah, the snare is a little bit easier to spot the transient. Also, kick is the shittiest one to do because there tends to be a lot more kick hits than everything else. Those are our, see, we are already on the flames with the snare. With the kick it took forever. There, that's good. There. normal. That's all the snares. And then we just have a few tom hits to contend with. That's good, that's good. Done. Again, keep in mind, if you're doing a whole song, this might take like an hour to get through. If it's like a technical death metal song, maybe a bit more. But once this is done, you know that every MIDI hit is perfectly aligned to, you know, the sample, which is what you want, so you don't have any phase issues. Then the next step for me here is making sure the velocities make sense. And that's one of the powerful things of using the MIDI as opposed to the just going from, you know, audio to through like Trigger 2 or something, because you can actually go in and control the velocities. So you see that the velocities are kind of all over the place. What I tend to do is just bump them all up to 127 and just leave it there. Kidding. I just bump them all up to 127 and just pretend I'm kind of programming the drums. And then like as a starting point, I just go to somewhere like around 120, which are pretty strong hits, but not top hits. And then just go through the performance and then vary them. So for kicks, I tend to maintain them quite consistent, because that's what I'm trying to get out of kick samples anyway. But you know, just vary them a little bit in some parts. And if you have like a section of the song that's a little bit quieter, this one actually the wrong one, that's the lower one. Like here, for instance, that I would definitely take care of that, and I will, I guess. So yeah, with snare, let's bring them all to 120, and then here you have a little bit of a build up. These are all pretty consistent. This is something around like that. Then we have a couple flams. Let's have the second one be there. Let's have the second hit of the flam be a little bit lower, but on the first one we'll bring him down so it's a little bit of a build up between the one and the other one. And here it's also somewhat of a build up. Actually, these need there, and then get up to. And you can just kind of build the whole performance like this, and then you just means you have more dynamic samples. And when you start listening to them, then you want to make sure that you have phase. And now with this approach, before we go on to the spikes themselves, like the audio spikes, right now I just have some good MIDI notes that I can use to augment my drums, right? If I turn on the rest of my return channels here for this particular instrument, that's already done. So I have like the overheads and rooms as well, so you can go from at a nice, you can augment your performance like that. You don't need to replace it. You can if you really need to, but you don't necessarily need to replace it. You can just augment your performance, use some like nicer rooms, especially if you're recording drums in like a smaller room where you don't really have like a nice big kind of splashy room sound. You can introduce room samples like that. And I like these libraries. I mean, there's multiple libraries that are great. These are the two that I have and I like. But you know, I have a good variety of snares here, and I find that between these and these, I have more than enough to get by, and they all sound great. Same for kicks and stuff. I can just kind of be like, oh, cool. Just figure out which one kind of matches the natural snare the best, and just go from there. And that's it. Like that part of the job is done. The next step, or the last step on this case that I would do, is I would turn these also into blips, right? So as a last added step, I would just kind of make these become clips again so we can move them around. And I already have set up here a few MIDI tracks for that. You would have to basically just create new MIDI instrument tracks, set up trigger 2 or whatever you're using to generate your bleeps from. I already have, again with the settings, I already have the right notes set up for each, and I would just drag these in and commit them. Actually, let's do that. That way we're back to the first iteration of the spikes where I'm using a blip, right, for each hit, and I know that's going to be, all of the qualities of, going through the MIDI, phase accurate, sample accurate, blah 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 blah, and then I have the MIDI to trigger the samples and the audio to trigger any sidechain stuff that I want to do. And just as a quick thing, I'll give you an example of what that looks like on a practical side as well. So these, as you can see, for all of them, ideally you just have them going nowhere, right? Actually, let's just turn a set of them on. You have them going nowhere because you don't want to hear them ever, but I already have some sends here to kick sidechains, shells, so all shells sidechain, snare sidechain, and then what I would use that for is for gating, for instance. So let's solo the top snare, the original signal of the top snare. So you can hear there's some bleed there. I would pull up something like Silencer or Pro G or whatever gate you want to use that has, a key function, and I would select, in this case, the snare sidechain bus, and then turn on the sidechain. And what's triggering the gate is not the signal itself here, but the actual, the actual blip. And one really powerful thing you can do with this is actually shift this guy around. So right now it's just set to be starting exactly where the hit happens, right? Which is cool. But sometimes you want to have a little bit of a lead up, right? And actually, let me change this to the to Pro G because it's a little bit easier to visually see what's going on. So here on Pro G, just go on external input. We're still picking up from the snare sidechain. We set the threshold, you have the ratio, the range, blah blah, and you have an attack, right? So you have the gate. Whenever you have the signal, it takes a little while for it to open up, and you set the speed of the attack to, you know, right now it's at 1 millisecond, so you can set it to 0, where sometimes you get some artifacts, and you can set it to like whatever. If you go really slow, you lose, you miss the transient. So you want to have it fairly quick. But what having this separate thing trigger your gates allows you to do is actually move them ahead of the hit, the hit, so that your gate starts opening, let's say 1 millisecond before your hit even actually happens, and then when you get the punch of the transient, the gate's already fully open. So here is an example. I'm going to do 5 milliseconds. We're picking up from this guy, and it's not shifted. Right? We're going from... Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this snare track, go select 5 milliseconds, and then just shift it 5 milliseconds before the hit. See how I have all the punch back? Because this is hitting the threshold, and then it opens up, but that happens 5 milliseconds ahead of the actual hit. So the hit is completely unimpeded, or however the fuck you say that. So there you have it. I think that's all. I mean, this also goes for everything else that you're sidechaining. If you have, a compressor on your kick, you can, trigger it from, if you have a compressor on your bass that you want to sidechain from the kick, you can use your kick sidechain for that, and you can be really precise. And because it's just a quick, very, very quick thing, it's not going to linger for a long time. It's going to be super quick. But if you want it to be a little bit slower, you can just make the release, so you can shape it however the way you want, however you want it. So that is it for today. It's a lot of examples. I hope you got something out of it, and I'll see you next time.